Segment 12A, Introduction. For many years, historians believe that the time of the Pax Romana, 31 BC to 235 AD, was the happiest time in human existence, a regular golden age. The high point of the Pax Romana lasted from 96 AD to 180 AD, when Rome was ruled by the so-called five good emperors. Modern times and thorough historical inquiry have corrected this picture somewhat. The Roman standard of living was poorer all around than it is today, especially for the lower classes. Life expectancy back then was no doubt much lower than it is today. The government, at best, the Principate, was at best a benign tyranny. Yet life in the Roman Empire during the time of the Pax Romana was indeed, I would say, a high point of ancient civilization. Our nation's founders were inspired by the achievements of the Romans during this time, and they wanted to emulate them. The Pax Romana is therefore well worth examining. Segment 12B, Pax Romana, looks at the nuts and bolts of the Roman peace. Just how did Rome's civilizing mission function in various parts of the empire? How was the empire as a whole held together? The Roman army was stripped down to an economical hardcore of veterans, focused more on playing defense than on offense. Roman legions were stationed at known danger spots with the ability to move fast and strike hard. This policy of defense freed up money to be spent on social needs and upon improving the empire's infrastructure. A rough social safety net was created, called the alimenta, and the empire itself positively sprouted baths, theaters, aqueducts, and roads. One important part of Rome's civilizing mission was its very great diversity. Roman citizenship could be granted and enjoyed regardless of race, creed, or native language. This diversity also brought needed new blood into the Roman culture, especially to the Roman upper classes. As when the Romans first encountered Hellenistic culture, the Romans didn't look down their noses at the people they had conquered. The Romans continued to adapt intelligently to new ways, at the same time preserving the beloved mos maiorum and profiting from interaction with new peoples and different ways. In segment 12C, the five good emperors, we examine the definite high point of Roman civilization, even if it really wasn't the high point of world history. The underlying success of the Antonine emperors, so-called because of their family name, or the five good emperors, so-called because there were five of them, was due to a principle called co-option. The first four of these emperors did not pass the imperium down to their male offspring. Instead, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and Antonius Pius selected a promising young man from the Roman upper classes, adopted this man into their family, and groomed him as the future princeps. For once, the Roman Empire experienced a smooth transition of power from the princeps to a worthy successor. One common thread connecting these emperors was their belief that both the princeps and the state should serve the good of the human race, the salus generis humani, and not the other way around. Although class inequities, gender inequities, and other such things were still practiced then as now, the so-called five good emperors did their best to level the playing field for all Romans. Unfortunately, the fifth good emperor was a very good emperor, the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. He picked as his successor his worthless son Commodus, breaking the practice of co-option and dragging the empire down along with it. In segment 12D, Church and State in the Early Empire, we compare the rather stale Roman state religion with the rising Christian sect. The worship of the old Greco-Roman deities had served Rome pretty well over the centuries. It had built a common Roman identity, and as the Romans themselves believed, ensured the success of their nation. But better living conditions raised questions about the purpose of human existence and the hope for some kind of satisfactory afterlife. And in these areas, the Roman state religion was found greatly wanting. Although the Romans generally tolerated others' religions, so long as they didn't threaten the mos maiorum too badly, the government does seem to have taken a quick dislike to the Christians. The Christians were persecuted sporadically as early as the reign of Nero, but widespread persecution took longer to build up. The Christian faith was itself going through important adjustments, especially organizational, and we'll trace these items too. Enlightenment historians such as Edward Gibbon often blamed Christianity for undercutting Rome's mos maiorum and for making Rome weak. The question is, how true was this? Segment 12b, Pax Romana. The Latin term Pax Romana can be translated as Roman peace. More specifically, it means the 2 centuries of comparative peace and prosperity, which began with Augustus in 31 BC and ended with the fall of the Severan dynasty in 235 AD. The use of the word pax, or peace, might imply the absence of wars. In fact, there are almost always wars on one border or another, and even a brief civil war. Yet the Roman Empire, now including the entire Mediterranean world, was far more peaceful and stable than it had ever been during the Republic. Moreover, the subject peoples of the Roman world truly became Romanized during this time. The Roman legal system ensured the rule of law. The Roman army kept the borders safe from marauders, and the Roman navy kept the seas free from pirates. Attention to the needs of all the people in the provinces as well as in Italy kept the empire remarkably free from social disorder. Even the so-called Year of the Four Emperors, 68 to 69 AD, merely interrupted the series of order and prosperity instead of stopping the Principate in its tracks. Rome's territorial gains were very modest during the time of the Pax Romana. Augustus had hoped to extend Rome's influence in Germany beyond the Rhine. His efforts backfired in 9 AD, when Hermann der German annihilated 3 Roman legions at Teutoburg Wald. This defeat at Teutoburg Wald made him advise Tiberius to keep the empire's boundaries right where they were, and to focus on keeping what Rome had already gained. Most of the imperial army of 150,000 men was kept busy on those borders not defined by the sea, the desert, or the great rivers. They marched, they drilled, and they built fortifications. The Rhine and the Danube valleys would always remain hotspots, and sometimes required additional forces, as did the restless Jews of Judea. Over time, Britain, Arabia, and Dacia, that is, modern-day Romania, were added to the empire, and a handful of client kingdoms were annexed. For the most part, though, Rome focused upon developing internal stability. More and more provincials won the full Roman citizenship, and many of the more enterprising provincials actually found their way to Rome, which had become virtually the capital of the Mediterranean world. This diversity brought desperately needed new blood to Roman society. 4 of the 5 good emperors could trace their ancestry to either Spain or southern France. Although the Principate was a dictatorship built on control of the Roman military, Augustus's successors made some positive contributions to his legacy. Tiberius found the ablest governors he could and left them in their jobs as long as they were willing to serve. Claudius streamlined the government, taking it away from the equestrian class, which was more concerned with making a personal fortune, and replacing them with ex-slaves, having specialized administrative skills. These freedmen, as they were called, eased the problem of running an empire with their focus and their competence. They tended to look on the princeps as their patron and leader, which made them more loyal and more reliable than the free-thinking equestrians. The inhabitants of the Greek-speaking East also flourished under Roman control. Although the provinces were still governed by Romans and Latin was the official language, the urban Hellenic culture was allowed to continue more or less untouched. Provided a city paid its taxes and contributed troops, it could retain its own system of magistracies and local government under their traditional names. Greeks who did choose to master the Latin language had the chance to earn Roman citizenship. And if they attained citizenship, they had the same opportunities, political and business, as Italian-born native speakers of Latin. Both the Apostle Paul and the pagan biographer Plutarch, Greek speakers both, were proud to claim Roman citizenship and grateful for the benefits it conferred. The Romans were also attentive to the infrastructure of the empire and spent money on improving the roads, building aqueducts, and whatever other buildings a large city may find necessary. The Greek-speaking peoples of the lands conquered by Alexander the Great, himself declared a god, were also comfortable with having a god emperor. As long as they paid homage to the princeps, they were allowed freedom of worship in all other respects. Even the Jews were willing to offer prayers for the emperor's genius, or the emperor's guardian spirit, and as a result were left alone. The Christians, who refused to worship the emperor or any part of the emperor as a god, were not usually allowed freedom of worship. As imperial powers went, the Roman hand fell very lightly on the East during the time of the Pax Romana. In the far less urbanized West, the Roman culture didn't have to compete with Hellenistic ways. It therefore established deeper roots and did so more quickly. In northern Africa and coastal Spain, once Carthaginian territory, great cities already existed and were allowed much the same rights as Greek cities. In the Roman provinces of Spain, Gaul, Germany, and Britain, however, people passed more or less directly from tribal government and tribal culture to an urban culture and Roman citizenship. Latin was never more than a second or third language, however important it was, in the Greek East. But in the Romanized Western provinces, Latin, or some variant of Latin, became the native tongue. To these former tribal people, the divinity of the Roman Empire and the Roman Emperor made perfect sense. Accepting the imperial cult was no problem for them. Since the Romans were the first to bring urban civilization to most of Western Europe, the West's great cities tend to have developed out of Roman military bases such as Londinium and Lutetia Parisorum. As we have seen, the Roman Empire brought the benefits of Roman government and law to an enormous territory. At the same time, the Romans willingly accepted what other cultures had to offer, especially in the case of the Greeks, whose science, art, literature, and philosophy the Romans had assimilated as Hellenism long before the Republic fell. The Romans also embraced the influence of other Eastern civilizations, such as the Jews, the Persians, the Babylonians, and the ancient Egyptians. Jews, Egyptians, Persians, and ancient Egyptians were allowed to become Roman citizens, and Rome was again that much the richer for the needed new blood. Many of these new Romans, men and women alike, rose to high and responsible positions in Roman life. For a nation so fixated on its own mos maiorum, so in love with the way of its own elders, the Romans demonstrated a surprisingly amazing ability to adapt. Back in 1 second. Segment 12C, the 5 good emperors. The period from Nerva's accession in 96 AD to Marcus Aurelius's death in 180 AD is generally called the time of the 5 good emperors. During this time period, living conditions were better for some Romans than they were for others. The wealthy still were far outnumbered by the poor. In the countryside, life was nastier, more brutish, and shorter than in the cities, where the masses wallowed in the proverbial bread and circuses. Yet the Roman life offered unusual compensations. The Roman people was diverse, in its culture inclusive. The Roman government respected the rule of law, and the emperors, in fact, believed themselves responsible for the salus generis humani, the well-being of the entire world and its people. The time of the 5 good emperors was indeed the high water mark of the ancient world's greatest empire. Writing in Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Edward Gibbon describes the 18th century admiration for the time of the 5 good emperors, and I quote, "If a man were called to fix the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous, he would, without hesitation, name that which elapsed from the death of Domitian to the accession of Commodus. The vast extent of the Roman Empire was governed by absolute power, under the guidance of virtue and wisdom. The armies were restrained by the firm but gentle hand of 4 successive emperors, whose characters and authority commanded involuntary respect. The forms of the civil administration were carefully preserved by Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, and the Antonines, who delighted in the image of liberty and were pleased with considering themselves the accountable ministers of the law. Such princes deserved the honor of restoring the republic, had the Romans of their days been capable of enjoying a rational freedom." The path to this remarkable development was itself rather amazing. When Domitian met his end in 96 AD, the Roman Senate did have a chance to reestablish the old republican government. Yet a century and a quarter of the Principate had in fact rendered Rome unable to enjoy its quote-unquote rational freedom. To the Senate's credit, it decided instead to appoint one of its own as the next emperor. The respected old Senator Nerva accepted the purple, not only filling the power vacuum, but setting many positive precedents during his brief reign from 96 to 98 AD. The first of these was adopting as his heir the Spanish general Marcus Ulpianus Traianus, better known as the Emperor Trajan. This practice of selecting a qualified adult male, adopting him into the imperial family, and grooming him for the job is called co-option. Co-option was the primary reason for the success of the 5 good emperors. Because co-option guaranteed an orderly transition of the empire to a worthy successor, Roman government remained amazingly stable during this time. In turn, good government furthered the good of the Roman Empire and the Roman people. Sadly, the pattern of co-option was broken when the philosopher king Marcus Aurelius left the empire to his biological son Commodus, with disastrous results. When Trajan took over the empire in 98 AD, he demonstrated strong imperialistic tendencies. Feeling that the best defense was a strong, proactive offense, Trajan greatly expanded the empire's boundaries. He captured Dacia in 106 AD and Mesopotamia by 116 AD. Despite his fighting spirit, though, Trajan exhibited a great deal of tolerance to Romans, even toward the otherwise suspicious Christians. Trajan was followed by two capable administrators, Hadrian, 117 to 138 AD, and Antoninus Pius, 138 to 161 AD. Hadrian thought that conquests for conquest's sake was wasteful. Therefore, he withdrew the Roman armies from Mesopotamia. Instead, Hadrian went back to Augustus's theory of creating easily defensible borders. Hadrian also visited as much of his empire as he possibly could, meeting the people he served as emperor and personally directing improvements to the empire's infrastructure. Antoninus Pius continued his adoptive father's policies in a reign notable primarily for being so uneventful. His adoptive son, Marcus Aurelius, ruled 161 to 180 AD. Marcus followed the same steady approach to government, even though he had to spend most of his time fighting barbarians on the frontier. In his scanty free time, often late at night, Marcus wrote down his Meditations, a series of unconnected philosophical observations on life, religion, and public affairs. His personal focus on ensuring the salus generis humani, or good of the human race, reflected a Stoic tradition going all the way back to ancient Greece. Unfortunately, Marcus picked a poor successor. The reign of Marcus's biological son, Commodus, from 180 to 192 AD, marked the end of the age of the 5 good emperors. The age of the 5 good emperors brought unprecedented material prosperity and military security to the entire Roman world, hence the term Pax Romana, Roman peace. In this way, at least, the salus generis humani was enhanced. The wealthy has always benefited most. But in order to retain favor with the emperors, the wealthy were also made to donate great amounts of money to the upkeep of their communities and to those of their fellow Romans who were less fortunate. The alimenta was invented, a complicated form of welfare payment to the poor, financed by the profit on low-interest small business loans. Apparently, the alimenta program was so prevalent, so widespread, that none of our surviving Roman historians wrote about it. All Romans benefited from the building projects and festivals sponsored by the emperor and the upper class. Even those Romans eking a rough life out in the countryside benefited too, if only from the improved personal and internal safety coming from secure borders. But all Romans alike had to pay a certain price for their prosperity. These costs included the permanent loss of personal liberty and loss of the chance to make an individual contribution to Roman life. The so-called 5 good emperors ruled to ensure the safety and well-being of the Roman world's inhabitants, but they didn't really do that much for the intellectual or spiritual life of the Roman world. It's no accident that the quote-unquote golden period of Latin literature ends during this time. The Roman upper class seems to have picked luxury over education. From this point on, most of the Roman world's literary development took place outside the city of Rome, in North Africa, in Greece, and even in the Middle East. It is also telling that the Roman mob welcomed the accession of Marcus Aurelius' son Commodus, and they continued to support him long after he'd shown his true colors. Who needs a boring old philosopher king like Marcus Aurelius when you have a god emperor who appears in the Colosseum and shoots ostriches with a bow and arrow from the imperial box, all the while dressed up as Heracles? And just what was one of Rome's leading citizens to do if they were summoned by the emperor and commanded to address him from now on as Hercules? They'd say, "Hello, Hercules." All it took to set the age of the 5 good emperors on its ear was one whack job. Back in 1 second. Segment 12D, Church and State in the Early Empire. The Roman state religion greatly helped the Roman sense of solidarity and helped enhance the status of the Roman emperors. Yet its fixation on maintaining the pax deorum, peace of the gods, and its contractual do ut des, I give so that you may give, relationship between humans and deities, could never have satisfied the Romans' deeper spiritual needs. Eastern religions which directly address spiritual needs, such as Judaism or the religion of the ancient Egyptian goddess Isis, were tolerated in Rome as long as they didn't offend the mos maiorum, and sometimes even when they did. The Asian cult of the Magna Mater, imported toward the end of the Second Punic War in 205 BC, included the self-castrated eunuch priests of their self-castrated god, Attis. Ouch! Yet, their belief systems were never incorporated into the Roman state religion. Indeed, religions deemed harmful to the state were actively attacked, as was the case with the Bacchic religion of the Greek wine god Dionysus in 188 BC. It was one thing to embrace the Greeks' Hellenistic art, science, literature, and philosophy, but the Senate was less happy with the prospect of decent Roman men, and worse yet, women, actively worshiping the cross-dressing Greek god of wine and partying. The consuls were instructed to stamp the Bacchic religion out, and many Romans chose death over disavowing the divinity of Dionysus. But the Bacchic religion, for all that, did not go away. The ruins of Pompeii, destroyed by volcanic eruption in 79 AD, show evidence of Bacchic temples. It seems, and this is especially true of difficult times, that you just can't keep a good mystery religion down. Beginning with Augustus, the Roman state religion included the Hellenistic practice of emperor worship. Emperor worship appealed to the people of the Greek East and made sense to the less civilized people of the West, but offended educated Romans and offered absolutely nothing to spiritual seekers in general. The seeds of Christianity would fall upon fertile soil. Historically, Christianity developed from the Jewish faith. Jesus of Nazareth was himself a Jew, as were all his earliest followers. So a few words about the Jews are in order. Wherever in the world fortune had taken the Jews retained their unique customs, their unique language, and their unique faith in one ethical God who had selected the Jews as his chosen people. They believed that a great deliverer or Messiah would arise to deliver Israel from its enemies and lead all Jews to a glorious new golden age. This messianic belief was especially strong in the days of the early Roman Empire, just as Augustus was marketing the Principate as the basis of Rome's golden age. Different sects of Jews differed considerably on how the Messiah would carry out his function. Some Jews, like the Essene sect, believed in withdrawing as much as possible from everyday life to prepare for the judgment day and hopefully for eternal life. Not that all Jews believed in an afterlife, but the view was becoming more popular. Other Jews hoped that the Messiah would arrive as a great soldier who would drive those Romans out of Judea once and for all. The Christians accepted as their Messiah a carpenter named Jesus of Nazareth. For a long time, Jesus and his teachings escaped the notice of the Roman world, save for perhaps for the legate Pontius Pilatus, a historical figure, by the way, who was responsible for Jesus' crucifixion. Because Jesus' teachings were collected only some time after his death, establishing their precise meaning is extremely difficult. The process continues to this day. I'm confident it always will. And I will leave you to consider these matters yourself in keeping with your personal faith or your academic interest or whatever. I do have to point out, though, that the New Testament's teachings are complex and sometimes paradoxical. These complexities in turn explain the extremely wide range of beliefs about what Jesus actually taught. For example, prior to the American Civil War, to which we'll be returning in a while, both the abolitionists and the slaveholders could support their causes with chapter and verse from the New Testament. While irritating, no doubt, to people who would just rather be told what to believe, Christianity presented its believers with spiritual and intellectual challenges. Those who wished simply to believe could respond to Christianity's simple message of sacrifice and redemption. Those who wished to engage intellectually with the divine found Christianity equally satisfying. Then as now, when believers found themselves frustrated by what they saw as a system of Christian worship they found unsatisfactory or inappropriate, they could appeal to their own study of the New Testament and to what they saw as Christianity's true traditions and worship accordingly. The Christian sense of intellectual and spiritual challenge was just about completely absent from the religions of the early Roman Empire. During the time of the Pax Romana, Christian beliefs were in a state of flux. The belief in Jesus as the Messiah had led to expectations of an imminent second coming. As these expectations started to fade and transform themselves, the Christian church began to prepare itself for an eventual second coming, which nobody could predict accurately. One task was organizational. The Christian church began to develop a hierarchy of religious leaders and specific rituals of worship. This task, of course, required close study of Jesus' teachings for spiritual and organizational guidance. The church had also to define a working relationship with the secular world in general, and the Roman government in particular. Yet, the Christian church remained distinctly aside from the secular world, openly turning its back on the logic and reason employed by the emperors who ruled it. The Christians tended to believe more in faith, and they drew purpose for their existence from the belief they were created by God the Father and saved by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. During the comparative prosperity of the Pax Romana, and especially the time of the 5 good emperors, this strength of faith and sense of personal worth did not seem like a big deal to a wide number of Romans. But as the empire began to crumble and break, the Christian church made converts a whole lot more easily. At Matthew 22:21, Jesus bids the Pharisees, "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God's." The Christians' self-assurance was off-putting to those Romans who did not believe. Nor did the Christians render all the things unto Caesar which Caesar demanded. They could and did work at their jobs, pay their taxes, and even served in the military. But the Christians could not and would not and did not join in the old Roman state rituals or take part in the modern Roman emperor cult. The Christians' unwillingness to play along was tolerated in better times, but worse times were on the horizon. When bad times came, Romans immediately assumed that the Pax Deorum was being violated, and the Christians would be the leading suspects. In suggesting that Christianity weakened Rome's moral fiber, the Enlightenment historians are oddly enough bringing up a charge that the Roman pagans themselves made all the time. Segment 12E, Conclusions. 1. Rome's civilizing mission. Some of the Roman Empire's peoples needed all the civilizing they could get, as in Gaul and my own ancient ancestors in Great Britain. Some had already been civilized for millennia before Romulus and Remus went up the hill, as was the case in ancient Egypt. Regardless, for more than 2 centuries, the Roman Empire excelled in giving their subjects the best government possible at the time. Not to say that lower-class people or women or certain minorities didn't get more than their fair share of abuse. They did. But rich or poor alike, they got the rule of law, a secure lifestyle within secure borders, and the chance to better their lives through hard work. The empire heeded Virgil's call to spare the vanquished. In fact, the Romans usually assimilated their vanquished. Yet the Roman emperors had less luck with humbling the haughty. The Dacian War, the wars with the Persians, were very costly. The Romans, however, did not get so caught up in this that they lost sight of the nation's best interests. 2. Co-option works. When Domitian went to his eternal reward in 96 AD, leaving behind no heir, the Roman Senate had a chance to restore the Republic. They decided not to. Instead, the Senator Nerva was appointed princeps with the understanding that he would adopt the successful general Trajan as his heir. This policy of co-option solved the problem of ensuring a smooth transfer of power to a worthy successor. Although the 5 good emperors each had different personalities and different strengths, they shared one major concern. They all believed that the princeps was there to promote the well-being of the human race, the salus generis humani. Marcus Aurelius, last of the 5 good emperors, believed that his biological son Commodus would rule the same way. Unfortunately, Commodus flushed it right down the commode. 3. Diversity is good. The wise republican policy of letting plebeians intermarry with patricians had enhanced Roman diversity from the 3rd century BC onward. During the Social War of 91 through 88 BC, the Romans learned a very hard lesson about offering their allies citizenship. It was a hard lesson they learned well. The Roman Empire became remarkably blind to skin color, native language, country of birth, and all of that good stuff. The best and most promising provincials could be awarded Roman citizenship with all of its privileges and all of its responsibilities. Rome's first professor of rhetoric, Quintilian, was a native of Spain. Plutarch, the biographer, was a native of Boeotia in Greece. Arabs, Africans, Gauls, Asians, Britons, and ancient Egyptians likewise became part of the Roman mix, politically and culturally. This diversity went a great way to explaining the survival of the Roman Empire. Romans, like Americans later, could be born that way, or they could become that way. 4. The state religion had little to offer. The old Roman religion had served its purpose back in the day. It was still capable of enhancing solidarity among Romans, but there was a great spiritual chasm. Even at their most appealing, the ancient Greco-Roman myths painted a depressing picture of the afterlife. But there was no explanation of human existence, and there was no reason to behave in a moral fashion. Romans across the empire would have to look elsewhere for spiritual satisfaction. As a general rule, the Roman government tolerated almost any religion, including mystery religions like those of Isis, Demeter, Mithras, and even Attis. Some religions, however, were considered to go against the mos maiorum, such as the mystery religion of Dionysus, persecuted by senatorial decree in 188 BC. Another religion perceived as going against the mos maiorum was that of Christianity. The Roman Empire would develop a serious love-hate relationship with this groundbreaking new faith.